I worry about you, Bevy. I worry a lot. Hey everybody, welcome to the Glasses Push. My name's Chuck, and today we're talking about Stephen King's It, both the novel and the recent movie. I haven't seen the Tim Curry one. I've heard mixed things. Moving on. So, who should read and watch this, and why should you care? Well, in a nutshell, I kind of think everybody. This is absolutely classic Stephen King, and then from a movie perspective, I'm not much of a horror guy, but this movie was tense, enthralling, and for how long of a novel it is, I actually think that the character development is pretty solid for it. The effects are terrifying, and plus, I mean, everybody's seen it, it seems, so if you haven't, I mean, you want to fit in, right? I mean, come on. What do I think? Let's tackle the book first. So, I immediately want to say it is a gigantic book, and there is a lot of character development, so while there are a lot of action sequences in the book, a lot of tense moments and page turners, there is an equal amount, if not more, scenes where you're just getting heavy character development and a lot of downtime, which, I perceive as building tension and building the world to set up payoff later. I believe the payoff's there. However, you may not see it that way. There's a lot of comments in my review for The Stand where it seems like there's several people who just think the book is too long and the character development isn't rewarding. And you know what, when it comes to King being verbose, there are some people that just aren't going to be, in for that. That some people prefer a more concise, taut book, and that's fine. It is not that type of book. And also, I would immediately like to say that if you had any notion that it is just about a scary clown, you could not be further from the truth. The clown is more of a symbol, and there's a lot more to it than that. And I don't want to go into spoiling things, but let me just say that was my big trepidation going into this, is that I'm not a horror fan, and I thought that the idea of the clown as just this terrifying antagonist was a little lame. Perhaps when it came out in the 80s, that was a little more groundbreaking, the creepy clown, but, over the decades, it's become a relatively trite trope, if we're going for the alliteration there. But I assure you, the clown is just one of many incarnations, but more specifically, how it's handled and what it means and what it actually is supersedes any preconceived notions that you may have about the clown. One of the most impressive elements of the book to me is actually the structure. So it's two separate stories basically told concurrently. So it's flipping back and forth between the past and the present, or two different time periods, children and adults. And for anybody that's read the book and been a little bit confused about certain scenes or meanings, really, the entire novel, it's not about a scary clown. It's not just about killing kids. It's about childhood and adulthood, what each of those things means, as well as the connection between them and what gets lost between childhood and adulthood. There's a lot of symbolism in there, and you may or may not have heard of a very, very controversial scene that takes place in the sewer near the end of the novel If you haven't heard about it, I'm definitely not going to spoil it for you, but when you encounter it and you are shocked by it, because you will be, just think about the theme, because that will definitely shift your perspective. That scene means something, and it's important, but it's challenging, and it's frustrating, and it's confusing, and it's gross. But as I've said before, I think challenging literature is the absolute most important type of literature. But all that said, to go back to my main point about the structure, it's absolutely fascinating to get the same story from two different perspectives, seeing how it plays out, seeing the parallels, seeing the differences. Just that structure makes the book very easy to consume from my perspective, and makes it very addictive. You want to finish one time period so you can get to the other and see how the themes established in the previous chapter are going to be repeated, what's going to be different. And absolutely not to beat a dead horse with any Stephen King review, I don't want to gloss over his writing style and his character development. So this is absolutely King in his prime. So the writing, just this beautiful mix of poetry, of just quick pulp action scenes. There's poetry to it, there's mystery, just all interwoven in such a fantastic way, and it's anchored by an incredible cast of characters that when you first start the novel, you are just scratching your head as to how you're going to remember all of these characters. And by the end, even the secondary and tertiary tier of characters, you're going to find it hard to forget them. There's absolutely no such thing as a dispensable character in a Stephen King book, and I love that, and that's what makes his books work so well, is it's grounded in such realism, so the fantastic elements really have kind of a feeling of truth to them, and so it doesn't feel like just BS or coming out of nowhere or something that you can't wrap your head around. You can very easily see yourself in these positions and see yourself in at least one, if not, multiple characters. However, I will say, considering that it is such a long novel, there definitely is a little too much repetition. There's kind of a theme and a pattern that Stephen King is trying to establish and show you, and especially considering that things get repeated in the two separate timelines. When you see the same beat repeated multiple times, yes, it's important to establish the theme and to show what's going on and how it affects all the characters, but after the third or fourth example of this happening, it does become a little tiring. Yes, we understand the omnipresence of this evil. We don't need to get these protracted scenes of every single character experiencing it, which isn't to say that any of these chapters on their own aren't interesting. I mean, they are. It's incredible writing. You're just absolutely hooked, but after a while, if there was something to trim, it would be that. However, it is an incredible journey, and the ending is fantastic. Definitely a great King ending, which also, as I've discussed before, and is definitely a point of contention among constant readers, is that sometimes the climax and or conclusion can be a little weak or rushed. However, I don't believe that is the case for either of it. The climax is just everything you would want it to be, just so exciting, mind-bending, and, in classic King fashion, explosive. Then the kind of calmer denouement after is appropriately poetic and beautiful and fitting. So it's one of those things, by the end of it, if you're buying into the long journey and the build-up, the payoff is great. So all that said, what would I rate it? And it being the novel, I'm going with a 95. Absolutely essential literature. The only minor quibble why it loses points, why it's not perfect, are these superfluous scenes that just really don't serve too much in the way of new information when you're dealing with a tome of such girth. That said, still amazing. So now let's talk about the movie. So my initial trepidation with the movie after finishing the book is that they do not have the timelines overlapping. This is just a story about kids. For me, especially with everything I said, that one of the most interesting things about the novel is its structure. I was wondering, how are they going to accomplish this? Because to me, that's the big hook of the book, and I didn't want to see it just get turned into this standard horror fare with absolutely no investment in the characters or their arc. And so, while the adult timeline is missed, it will be part of the sequel, which has mercifully been greenlit. But, again, all of my fears were assuaged when I saw the movie, and the character development for all the kids was fantastic. Of course, I would have liked to spend more time with the kids because they are absolutely fantastic actors all. But for the glimpses we got, they were very telling of the characters and did not in any way feel rushed, except for the fact that knowing all the other scenes in the book that were left out, you would want more. You get a little greedy that way, or at least I do. But for what they showed, absolutely true to the characters, and that was a true delight. And Pennywise the Clown, of course, when you talk about it, that's really all you think about. I haven't seen Tim Curry's performance, but I will say that our new Skarsgård, I really don't want to try and remember the whole name and butcher it, and of course I'm not going to Google it, because why? I mean, lazy. This is one terrifying clown. Just from the opening scene, your introduction to Pennywise, he's creepy, charismatic, and just monstrous. There's just this level of intensity there. It's hard to look away, but it's also hard to look at, and so that's exciting. It's exhilarating. And the movie really doesn't relent. It definitely focuses more on the action sequences, on tense encounters, as opposed to more of the quiet character development moments. But that is in no way a detriment, because the tension and that looming fear is incredibly important to maintain. And with so much ground to cover, even cutting out so much character development, I mean, it's still a long movie. And there is quite a journey to go through, even if it's only half of the tale, or less than half. But this movie is also not without its flaws. Mainly, it has to deal with the exposition of key plot points, that there are several scenes where you're unveiling more of the true nature of it, the explanation about its presence, what it wants, what its plan is, how it survives. All of these things are pretty clunky. You have one scene where the kids basically just casually realize this massive connection that in the book took quite a bit longer to figure out. It's just kind of written off as nothing. And then the key secrets about Pennywise, are revealed by Pennywise himself, or itself, to directly to the children. And this is the most frustrating thing, because there are excellent bits of dialogue, and they retain so much of the spirit of the original novel, and then for such critical plot points to be revealed in just absolutely clunky ways is a little disappointing. Of course, I am not one for spoilers, but just to kind of sum up my point, during the climax of the movie, this intense action sequence where the effects are outstanding, the floating, the deadlights, the multiple incarnations and shifting forms of it, so many things that are intense, awe-inspiring, just incredible CG. Then, in the final moments, you just hear Pennywise say, "Fear." You know, really? Really? Did you have to say that? Because I've kind of been shitting my pants in terror for 2 hours. You don't need to see fear. I smell the fear on me. You know, that may have been a bit crude, and so I do apologize for that. And you know what? In true fashion with the novel, perhaps mercifully you will forget about me making that comment until about 20 years from now. So you got that to look forward to. So, what would I rate the movie? As much as just to kind of be poetic, I'd want to give it an 86 to mirror the year that the novel came out. However, the movie is better than that. It is an absolutely exemplary horror movie, just terrifying with tremendous character development and just a little clunky exposition. We're going to give it a 92. It is excellent, just minor detractors, which in the grand scheme of things aren't that bad, especially if you look at the other recent King adaptation of The Dark Tower, where they just absolutely had no sense of tone or really any sense of natural exposition. So this was a breath of fresh air, absolutely. I'm really looking forward, however, to hearing your thoughts on the matter. So what did you think of the book? Do you agree that some of the repetitive scenes of Pennywise and it chasing after the kids and adults, you know, a little tiresome? What'd you think of the movie? Do you agree that I think that their gamble of splitting the movie into 2 parts is actually going to work, but what do you think? And I don't know, since this is another of the longer King novels, what's your take on the length of Stephen King's novels, and do you think it's worth it to spend more time in a truly excellent book, or would you rather read, you know, like several really good books that are shorter. Until next time, this is the finally accurately named Glasses Push signing off. Thanks.